Hello ma'am, my name is Ajay Jadhav and today's date is 13 December and today I will choose topic annotation of auto configure. The in a Spring annotation is based on the jar dependency that have to added if you give that database jar present in a class path has is not a configure and to being related has a database as manually has for boot has a configure that will be features of automatically configure it will it's in your project we have able to auto configure that will be feature of annotation at the rate and auto configure annotation as this annotation does not because is a wrap into the at the rate bin annotation at the rate spring boot annotations that will be annotation that combination of annotation at that component scan at that component scan and at that configure as we have to at that configure has a application annotation instead has using of at the rate auto configure spring boot application has to the enable to at the rate auto configure when we can have to added up a spring in the starter dependencies project into the spring boot. Auto configure looks has a spring MVC as a class path is a auto configure. Dispatcher is to the default error page and in a web jar. That similarly we can have added a spring boot that will be a data jar dependency but has to the spring boot data configure has a data resource of a manage that will be disabled to the specific configure classes not to want apply. We have used execute or attribute and the annotation at the rate auto configure is disabled to the auto configure class has disabled. The specific auto configure class says as if you not want to the applied into the execute attribute the annotations are at the rate auto configure is a disable auto configure is a classes of a spring boot auto configure automatically we can configure our dependencies based on a jar dependencies that will be into the that will be added if you that will be a dispatcher jar and present in the class path as a configure has been to related our database manually. The spring as a spring boot auto configure is a feature of automatically we can add it into the project. Can we enable our configure as a feature using annotations at the rate annotation has a but of annotation does not has used to the because of a wrap into the inside the wrap into the inside at the spring annotations has a is that will be a spring boot the applications as a combination of annotation first is a at that component scan and second is a enable auto configure and is however we can has to add the spring boot annotation as a annotation that instance of using of enable auto has significantly applications of at the component scan that will be when we add the spring into the start web dependencies in our project that time we can use that spring boot is a auto configure as a spring MVC class path auto configure and dispatch server. In a dispatch server as a error page and jar web jar as similarly we can add dependencies are spring and spring auto configure as a auto configure as a data source and entities auto managed into the disable into the specific auto configure class do not have one to the applied into the execute attribute of the attribute of that at the string annotations. Thank you, ma'am.